Welcome to Dialing In Your Coffee Business, where we help cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. I'm Michael Ryan. I'm a certified business coach and consultant that helps cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. My guest today is Chris Deferio. Chris Deferio is the founder of Keys to the Shop podcast and consulting. He's been in the coffee industry for over 20 years and has occupied a wide array of roles, from barista to competitor, trainer, and of course, consultant. He regularly speaks at industry conferences on topics such as barista culture, cafe leadership, and shop systems. I'm excited for today's episode because as a consultant and coach and as a podcast host, Chris doesn't very often get to talk very much about himself. And so if you're a longtime listener of his podcast, I hope you'll enjoy this episode because he shares a little bit more of his story and his history and his journey through the coffee industry. I highly recommend listening to his podcast, Keys to the Shop, checking out his website, keystotheshop.com, following him on Instagram at Keys to the Shop, and emailing him, chris@keystotheshop.com. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this podcast is an extension of our coaching and consulting. It's a part of our effort to make all of the tools necessary to build a healthy coffee business zero cost to everyone. In keeping with that theme, I'd like to thank one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our How to Grow a Roastery online course. The internet and social media are filled with people trying to help you roast your coffee better and better. But there is almost nothing available to help you run the business side of your roastery better and better. Whether you also own cafes or not, this online on-demand course will guide you through step-by-step everything you need to know to grow your roastery into a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. You can access this course and all of our other on-demand courses at threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/courses. And be sure to enter the code podcast100 at checkout to get $100 off any of our online on-demand courses. That's threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/courses and enter the code podcast100, all caps, to get $100 off any of our online courses. And now my conversation with Chris Deferio of Keys to the Shop. Chris, welcome to the podcast. I am super excited to have you. Thanks for being here, man.
I am excited to be on your podcast. It's really awesome. Congrats.
A couple of years ago when I first started thinking about having a podcast, there was two things that were like front and center in my mind. Number one was I felt like I had to tell you, and I did that like a year ago now. I was like, I'm thinking of starting a podcast.
Yeah.
But I felt like I had to tell you I was thinking about it long before we ever launched it. And then the second thing that was on my mind was, as soon as it's possible to do so, to have you as a guest, because I have so appreciated, so admired your work with Keys to the Shop consulting and podcasting and everything that you've done with, a lot of our shared experience was with Coffee Fest, and just popping into your talks has always been like on my short list of things to try and do when I'm running around doing other things. But I've noticed that it's not always the time and place with your own podcast and your speaking to share about yourself. And I thought, man, I have so many questions for you, and I'm sure other people do as well. And I'm curious if you'd be willing, not for your sake, as a personal favor to me and our listeners, to share a little bit about your story, your history, how you got started in coffee, and kind of an arc to take us through where you've come from and how you got started in consulting ultimately. Because I'm super fascinated. I know bits and pieces, but I don't have like the through line.
Yeah.
And I know I'm probably not the only one. So how did you get started in coffee in the first place? I mean, people always ask me, did you go to school to become a coffee business consultant? I'm like, there is no school for that. So how do you get started in something like this?
That's a great point. No, and I really appreciate your work as well. I'd be ashamed to not mention that, I always like it when people who have that kind of wisdom that I know is going to impact the lives of others are out there doing that and impacting the lives of others. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for having me on the show. So who is Chris Deferio and where did he come from?
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah. I mean, this will be my, I think, 24th year in coffee officially.
That's awesome, man.
And my start was similar to most people's,
Yeah.
dipping their toe into the barista world and finding an electric kind of a current of obsession about
Mm.
coffee. At first, maybe it's the caffeine, and then it just kind of pulls you in. And I went to a coffee shop. I was in a ministry school in the Midwest in Arkansas, and I went to a
Okay.
place called Arcega's Coffee a lot. Now, I
Mm.
drank coffee before then, um, and with my grandma in her house. It was like Maxwell Folgers blend or something,
Yep. Yep.
and it wasn't a thing. But in the coffee house scene, when you're in your early 20s and you're journaling and you're reading philosophy and stuff, and it's really a
I definitely don't know
feel.
what you're talking about.
You don't
So
know. Yeah, exactly.
that's such a weird thing. Who does that?
Well, it was definitely my space of
Yeah.
creativity and
Mm.
emotional channeling, and coffee was a part of that
Yeah.
at this shop. And I started to notice that I could taste the difference in coffees. So I developed preferences for coffees. And I'm still drinking on the road. I would get like English toffee, hot cappuccinos from the gas station, that kind of thing.
100%.
But in the pursuit of, coffee in general, it turned into sort of a hobby to think, oh, I do like coffee. I'm a little obsessed about now having better coffee myself in other areas of my life. um, I started to explore it just
Mm.
in the night, or 1999, 98 ish type of era.
Yeah.
And internet was not much back then, but what I did come across was the early forums and other
Mm.
things, which led me to discover David Schomer and
Yeah.
the concept of latte art. And actually, I worked in coffee a little bit, right as I got into this obsession, and got fired from
Oh my
Arcegas
gosh.
right away. I mean, maybe it was like a few months, but I would have fired me too, as I like to say, because I was passionate, but I was
I remember
useless,
that.
I think.
Yeah.
So I discovered specialty coffee at a shop in Tulsa when I was out there for visiting at a conference. And
Mm.
um, it just blew me away. It was Cafe Vita. And it was a macchiato, and I
Mm.
was obsessed. I didn't know that coffee could taste that good. I knew what latte art was, I think, but I hadn't ever experienced it myself.
Mm.
And it just changed me. And from that
Mm.
point on, when I decided what I was going to do once I left my staff position with this school, was coffee. And
Yeah.
one day I just sat up and I said, that's what I'm going to do. And I
Yeah.
never doubted the decision. So I started working in various coffee shops and moved back to upstate New York and Syracuse, New York, where I'm from.
That's right.
And I worked at Wegmans grocery store, coffee bar, blowing people away with latte art. Bad latte art, I would say. But I taught myself to do it at
Yeah.
their coffee shop by
Yeah.
watching videos. And then I found out that there was a specialty coffee shop not far from me in Ithaca called Gimme Coffee. And at that point, I was going to move to
Oh,
Seattle.
nice.
I was going to move because I knew Schomer was out there.
Yep.
I had actually interviewed him with a little mini cassette recorder that I brought with me. I went out to Coffee Fest in like 2013 or 2003 or so. Interviewed this guy. Actually, it might have been 2002, but he was gracious and he did this
Yeah.
for me. And I've had him on the show since then, so it's full circle. And I just worked my way through um, specialty coffee as
Yeah.
a barista and a trainer and a
Mm.
manager. And I started competing in latte art and started winning at
Mm.
Coffee Fest.
Mm.
Started judging and teaching latte art. I got some consulting early, however much you can actually be a consultant in those early days.
Sure.
But it was the early third wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the time where everyone was inventing things and trying things.
I love
Intelligentsia
it.
was like at the peak of their craft at Stumptown
Mhm.
and all the other places. Blue Bottle was
Yeah.
just getting started.
Mm.
So all of my peers in the industry are people who were just young, fresh-faced professionals in the competition circuit who were
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
geeking out online about all the minutia of coffee. And I just worked my way through that scene through various companies, all
Yeah.
very small
Yeah.
um, companies that were growing. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, my experience was essentially to be on the ground floor of concepts that were organically grown and expanding.
Mm.
And that's been the entirety of my experience. I've never worked for a large, like I would say a company that like Intelligentsia would be a great example, or others
Mm.
that are powerhouses in the industry,
Mm.
internationally recognized. But I
Mm.
count it as a blessing because we were in the midst of just elbows deep operational work,
Yeah.
um, codifying policies and
Oh,
dealing with interpersonal issues and hiring great people and having to let others go. I mean, it was just the real stuff
yeah.
of coffee shops.
Yeah.
And Coffee Fest has been a big part of this as well over the years. I've 20
Yeah.
years next year will be how long I've been there since I won my first latte art competition in
Okay.
2004. I've been judging pretty consistently since then,
Yeah.
and lecturing, teaching, and doing
Hmm.
workshops. So
Hmm.
all that I will say has basically just you can encapsulate it by saying I have been just immersed
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
specialty coffee
Mm.
culture
Hmm.
and the cafe culture since the beginning.
Mm.
And I disappeared for a little bit off the scene. I competed in the US Barista Championships. I got fourth place in 2007. And and then I started a family and got
Yeah.
married, etc. I had no time for competition, and I like bombed twice after that. It's like
Oh.
I need to focus in on my career, became an
Yeah.
operations manager, and just stopped participating as much in the industry,
Yeah.
except for starting a competition called America's Best Coffee Shop or Coffee
Oh yeah.
House. Remember
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I do. I
It,
loved that.
it was such a great competition. Um, RIP. But I will. Yeah, look up America's Best Coffee House if you get the chance.
Yeah.
There's still photographic evidence of this taking place.
Yeah, it existed. Well, if you've been around as long as you have, there's going to be some RIPs in the story.
Oh, that's dark.
Nothing lasts forever. Come on.
All my friends are dying or dead.
that's not that's not what I mean. It's not like you're an octogenarian and you're getting to that period of life. That's not what I
Then
mean. I
yeah,
just mean
just wait. I'll come back on
you.
the show when I am. So I really was a fan of the business world and to get
Yeah.
information about how to be a good manager, because one of the things that I
Mm.
saw was that great coffee shops
Mhm.
are destroyed because of poor leadership
Yeah.
and culture
Yeah.
and operational hazards that just basically are avoidable in some ways, but
Mm.
the barrier to entry in opening a coffee shop and sort of it's a spring loaded entry point. It's like boom, you can open a coffee shop, don't need to know anything about it, just go open it and then let passion be your guide. And some of the
I
most
love that.
passionate people turned out to be some of the most toxic,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's just like brewing coffee, there are um, there are parameters that we have to respect.
Ooh, that's good.
And so in my mind, I was just thinking, I don't want to perpetuate. And I had done toxic things. I had been a bad
Mm.
boss. I'd, been a trainer that people complained about because I was insufferable. Um, Lots of stuff you learn over the
Yeah.
years. But I wanted to deep dive, and so I started reading business books and Drucker and
Yep.
read podcasts of like
Mhm.
Dave Stachowiak's. Coaching for leaders was something I listened to on my walks, and now Dave is a good friend of mine, which
Mm.
is weird and awesome. Um, and
Yeah.
uh, I thought there is no resource like this in coffee right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I am tired of hiding out. I'm creative as a person. I am a hugely right-brained person in general,
Yeah.
and so I want to create something.
Mm.
Um, and so I started reading about podcasts and how to start them. And it
Yeah.
took a good part of, a year of planning and saying,
Yeah.
this is the niche that I'm going to fill.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a podcast specifically about running a great coffee shop and what's at the heart of it. And really, keys to the shop,
Mm.
as the phrase is concerned,
Mm-hmm.
that's my experience in opening a shop. I always felt this gravity,
Mm.
a sense of wonder of what's going to happen today as I open this door. And when I leave as a closer, I'm very proud of my work. I can hear the
Mm.
echoes of all of the impact that's happened throughout the day
Mm.
as I lock up and I put things at a right angle. I put the mop away and I walk out. I'm like,
I love it.
something great happened here today.
Yeah.
And the other meaning of the name is basically, and I'll end here because I've been talking a little bit, is
Oh, you're good.
um, that you can have all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but do you have the keys? I mean,
Mm.
if you can't get into the shop, you can't do
Yeah.
anything with it. And
Ah.
so far, the industry has taught us that you can get the stuff. We will sell you the stuff. But the key to using it is not so easily obtained. Even if you listen to a top five, podcast, like, or the 6 ways to win in specialty coffee, which I
Yeah.
put out episodes like that, but
Yeah.
it's a journey. And
Yeah.
so that's what this has been. And it's now going to be 7 years of Keys to the Shop.
It's amazing.
Almost 3 million downloads and
Mm-hmm.
750 episodes. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a ride.
I'd like to take a brief moment and thank another one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our How to Grow a Roastery group coaching cohort. This 12-week cohort is led by me, and it follows the 12 modules in our How to Grow a Roastery online course. But it is so much more than that. When you join our cohort, you get access to our owners-only Slack community, access to recorded group calls, and access to book a one-on-one call with me to talk about growing your roastery. In addition to that, I will personally review your website and your social media accounts. I will also personally review any materials you send me during the cohort, such as wholesale pricing sheets and marketing collateral. I always order coffee from our group coaching cohort members, so of course I'll be giving you feedback on product quality, fulfillment, and follow-up as well. You can watch the trailer for this group cohort and all of our cohorts at threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/group-coaching. Be sure to enter the discount code podcast500 to get $500 off your group coaching cohort. That's threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/group-coaching and enter the discount code podcast500, all caps, to get $500 off your group coaching cohort. One thing I didn't appreciate fully until I even I shared with you before we hit record that I attempted to start a podcast. And if anybody has even ever attempted to start a podcast, it takes more intentionality and discipline than one might realize. And so the minute I hit record and then was not satisfied with what I had recorded and had to come back and do it again and again and again, I thought of you and how long you've been doing it. 7 years, you said 3 million plus downloads. I don't think people realize how much intentionality, and maybe discipline's not the right word, but I don't know of a better one. The willingness to come back over and over and over again and actually make it happen. I heard a statistic that 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 7, and 90% of those don't get past episode 20 or 21 or something like that. It's something really small. So to say you're in the top 1% as far as podcast goes is a oversimplification, but I think people don't often realize how much discipline and intentionality that takes to do what you've done.
It's true in a sense. I said to my wife, if I do this, I'm just going to do it as long as I'm physically able. I can't just not. Yeah. I heard about pod fade when I was researching it,
pod fade,
where it just this is inconvenient. Think I'll stop.
Yeah.
I have the advantage also of having the show be something that it needed to work.
Yeah.
It was a hobby at first, and then it became something that was my full-time thing. It was a little risky.
Yep.
But the point is that it's a little, and it's not exactly, because I've never owned a coffee shop.
Yeah.
My own coffee shop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I count that as actually a benefit, as you might as well, because my perspective is a way broader than just an individual experience.
100%.
Having worked for many or
Yeah.
helped many open, and
Yeah.
now helping so many people with their own
Hmm.
shops and
Hmm.
teams and businesses. Um, but all that said is, when I'm coaching people now
Hmm.
and I'm talking on the show, what's emerged from my life over many years is the idea that it, you build momentum little by little, and the fruit of your labor is
Hmm.
seen at a time when you think there might not be fruit.
Hmm.
And you show up. If you show up every day, you
Hmm.
do great work, and you make it intentional,
Hmm.
over time something interesting is going to happen.
I love it.
You're going to find yourself with loyal listeners, or
Hmm.
in coffee shop's case, you're going to have unbeatable loyal customers
Yeah.
and staff who love you and cry when they
Hmm.
have to leave your coffee shop. And it's all about showing up consistently,
Hmm.
but not just doing the same thing every single time.
Hmm.
It's about having it be a lifestyle of learning and co-creation over time, but you show up consistently to do it. And you
Hmm.
can't, unless you decide ahead of time that this is just the way it is, and I'm
Yeah.
going to love every minute of it.
Yeah. I love that. I going back to the considering it a blessing to not have owned a coffee shop or a cafe, or I I really do think of it that way, and I'm always intrigued by you know folks who will say, this is usually on social media, they'll say something like, you've never owned a coffee shop, who are you? And it's always the person who's also never owned a coffee shop, so it's like that's that's a little bit of an irony in and of itself. But I literally this morning, just in my reading, I came across a passage, and their observation was about writers and editors. And
Oh, yeah.
editors don't write books. That's not their gifting. It's not their gifting is taking a piece of work that's been written and making it even better. And nobody critiques them for being like, well, you don't write your own books. So I just think it's a fascinating dynamic. I view it as more of like there's pros and cons to both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the main uh, pro, or why I consider it a blessing, is because our experience, and especially yours, is so much broader. If I ran one or two coffee shops, I'm all my advice is just going to be, well, this is how we did it. This is how we did it. Instead of being able to say, well, I've seen it done this way. I've seen it done this way. I've seen it this way.
Yeah.
This one's particularly weak, but you've got these other two options that are pretty viable.
Yeah. There's an
I
emergent
think there's
wisdom to that, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things I love about you and your podcast. I often think of you as a leadership philosopher. That's the space that you occupy in my mind, not a coffee consultant per se,
Mm.
but more of like a leadership philosopher. And you've taken that and you're gifting it to the coffee industry and to coffee business owners, cafe owners. Um,
I can see
but
that.
that broad view, that wide angle lens that you have, informs so much of what you share with coffee business owners, and it's so much more nuanced and so much more universally applicable, I think, than if you had just owned one or two coffee shops and you're like, well, this is how we did it at my shop. And so I appreciate that sort of
Yeah.
broad nuanced view that you bring to the table. um,
Yeah.
and
It's funny because you are, when you have your own business, what you're doing is you're supposed to be looking at all of what the business is telling you it needs, and that means observing a lot of different inputs, yeah,
Sure.
from staff and customers and
Yeah.
numbers as well. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
number one thing that contributes to the numbers, which we can easily get, I can tell you what the labor cost you're supposed to be looking at is, but you could have Googled that too.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Hmm.
Really, the reason why some of these things happen the way they do, that
Hmm.
you don't have great labor percentages, or you're not making money,
Hmm.
it's a multivariate problem that
Hmm.
needs leadership philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like a holistic way of approaching
Yeah.
a problem. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's get out of the way the fact that there are numbers that we need to meet. We're not going to ignore those things.
Totally.
Um, but the engine that drives success
Hmm.
is the relationships that we don't count on having to manage when we get into a business like coffee.
Yeah.
And if you don't doubt that, just go onto any forum. And what's the number one hassle that you got with your coffee shop? Oh, it's people. Big surprise. And no one will say it, but
Yeah.
it's also us
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
leaders.
Yep.
We're the problem, and people are the problem. So there's other stuff
And
too,
we are
but
people.
it's a yeah, yeah. It keeps things interesting. And each
Uh-huh.
coffee shop, I will say this, each coffee shop is different in that
Mhm.
you have one moment in time. And
Mhm.
this is why I'm so fascinated by the inner workings of a coffee shop, and what drives me at Keys to the Shop is the idea that I just want the foundation of the business to be so well cared for
Mhm.
that you have the ability to improvise and iterate on top of something that you can trust.
Yeah.
In
Mm.
relationships you can trust. That
Mm.
helps the entire value chain.
Mm.
Farmers want you to be really good as a boss,
Mm.
because if you are, then it's more likely that coffee is going to taste better. People will buy more coffee. It everything is touched by this,
Mm.
and so I do think that when we're looking at the coffee shop and we talk about how it's the last link in the chain
Yeah.
or the value stream,
Mhm.
um, we're tripping over dollars to pick up pennies, tips and tricks, hacks,
Mhm.
templates.
Yeah.
Plug this in, it'll work for you. And I really think that the value of what folk, and I'll say it, like folks like us will offer is that
Mhm.
um, maybe we'll start with the template, but the lever that we need to pull sometimes is right there, and people
Mhm.
just need permission.
Yeah.
And we help them over that hump, or we point
Yeah.
something out that only
Mhm.
this conversation could have drawn out. And so that's what's great about doing things with
Yeah.
coaching and consulting. I think you
Yeah.
probably might feel the same way.
Yeah. I like the way you said it better. I've always used the old phrase penny wise, pound foolish.
Mm.
But so nobody's heard that phrase apparently. But you said it in even more accessible way, tripping over dollars to pick up pennies. That is just a really hard thing to see. When I'm the one doing it, I'm the least likely person to catch it.
Yeah.
That outside perspective that you would bring working with somebody, in many ways, that's some of the most valuable uh, parts of working with a coach or a consultant in this context. Is they're much more likely to be able to have that outside perspective. Well, they're going to have that outside perspective to be able to see where we are tripping over dollars to try and pick up pennies, and especially because of that broad exposure.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about you is your pattern recognition skills, your ability to spot a recurring theme across multiple entities, multiple domains, and then distill it into something. I'm thinking specifically of your top 10 ways to lose employees talk. That
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
is like to me that's an example of what I'm talking about. That's a case in point of expert level pattern recognition and then distillation into like here's things that are happening almost everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and things to avoid. But it's really hard. It's really hard to identify those things. As they say, the fish is always the last to find out about water. And I think as owners, we're the last to realize where we're tripping over dollars to try and pick up pennies.
Yeah. That is
Yeah.
absolutely the case.
Yeah. So one quick question, dialing back, did you start teaching at Coffee Fest because you won the latte art competition? Was that kind of the
Mm-hmm.
arc there? Okay.
Well, here's how it happened is that I won, and they had a thing where if you win, they want you to come back and teach latte art. So I came back
Gotcha.
over and over again to teach latte art sessions with people, very good at it, um, and just kept doing it. And then
Yeah.
I added more content to the lineup, so it was not just latte
Yeah.
art. It started to become things that I was learning, and I
Yeah.
was actually good at as well.
Okay.
So
That's awesome. That's super cool. How you alluded to this earlier, but kind of the other place I wanted to go with you today is how you even started consulting. Like, what did that look like? You
mm-hmm.
mentioned as you were, going about learning and growing and teaching, consulting almost sort of happened organically, it sounds like. But take us through that sort of the nascency of your consulting when it was sort of, if this phrase fits, like happening accidentally or organically, and then
Yeah,
to like
well,
when it was formal, and then when it was full time too. Those are kind of the three big things I'd love to hear about.
like any young barista, I was like, I'm going to get business cards and people are going to listen to me. This is 1 + 1 = me
Guilt.
in your shop.
1 + 1 = me.
It's and everyone does this, and
I
I
did it. Yeah,
understand
I get
why
it.
there's a hustle. There's a hustle that people need, and there's just
Sure.
like, being a barista doesn't pay enough.
Yeah.
And so I'm right there with you. I mean, I had Vistaprint deliveries a lot, and
Yeah.
but it didn't amount to much. I would get hired to do some fancy latte art stuff,
Mm-hmm.
pigeonholed into this, of course, as a champion latte artist. It's like, ugh, the golden handcuffs. Um, and I go to like a conference at like restaurant show and show people leaf patterns. I saw um, the coolest part of that was that one time I got to be within like 50 feet of Truett Cathy of Chick-fil-A at a
Oh
booth
yeah.
because I was
Yeah.
working at um, I forget, Royal Coffee had hired me through Nuova Simonelli to do latte art stuff.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
yeah, so but that was the extent of it. And sometimes, people would hire me to help them with a concept shop.
Mm-hmm.
But in those young days, you just realize I'm out of my depth here, and I need more experience. And so that's what you do. And I, like I said, I went away. Had a lot more life experience, a lot more
Mm-hmm.
failures, a lot more victories. And when I started the podcast, one of the things that really happened was not only did I have hundreds of recordings that I just needed to get used to the sound of my own voice, which I hated,
Yeah.
right? And I
I'm
was like,
with you.
oh, I
Yeah.
sound so terrible.
Yeah.
Um, but I realized that I knew things.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't realize just how much you've accumulated over the years until you
Yep.
start journaling. And I'm not a writer of journals, but this podcast has forced me to coalesce knowledge
Yeah.
both from other people as nursing my own curiosity and
Yeah.
presenting it in
Yeah.
a succinct fashion, and my own knowledge over and over and over again. And if I
That's
don't, my sponsors are not going to be happy, because I told them that they would have so many ads. It helps because it's a discipline. So
yeah.
the consulting,
Absolutely.
it was just a natural outgrowth of the podcast. It
I
wasn't
love it.
necessarily my goal to.
Sure.
I didn't have this
Yeah.
mind map put out where it was like the
Love
center
it.
is keys to the shop, and then there's this like universe.
Yeah.
Um, so I started just by saying, I could help somebody who was
Mm.
asking. So I think somebody actually reached out to see if I did something like that.
Yeah.
And it might have been Reserva Coffee, who's been on the show as a Founder Friday episode,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think back in 2018, where I said yes. And I was like,
Yeah.
this might be the time for me to give myself permission to actually
Yeah.
speak authoritatively
Mm-hmm.
to somebody's business, which I don't take lightly.
Mm-hmm.
I the worst thing in the world is that I wouldn't serve well.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did, and it was helpful, and I was like, man, not in a cocky way, but
Mm-hmm.
almost like a very it was like a humbling thing. It is a
Mm.
humbling thing for
Yeah.
anybody to open up their
Yeah.
coffee shop to a consultant
Yeah.
to tell them what to do. And I don't come in there with flash. I'm not a particularly cool guy, so
Mm.
I don't have that going for me, So
Yeah.
the point is that consulting was a matter of similar motivation as the
Mm.
podcast. What
Yeah.
can I do with my
Yeah.
life to invest into coffee shops, something that is going to have an outsized impact on their
Mm-hmm.
success and on the industry itself? And
Mm.
that continues to be what drives the show, even if we
Mm-hmm.
reach 1,000 episodes, and
Yeah.
probably will, Lord willing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the motive there.
Mm.
And I forget if that answered all three of the sections of the question, but
it touches on them. I there's one piece that I think is really powerful and important for folks to understand, and maybe they don't realize this if they haven't done this in their own life. Do you remember the old saying, there's people who don't know and they don't know that they don't know, and then there's people
Mm-hmm.
who, anyway, it talks about the kind of the four possible postures, but the person who knows but they don't yet know that they know, that's the type of person that I am most passionate about unlocking and unleashing. And it sounds like you went through that arc of like coming to the realization that you know stuff, becoming that person who knows that they know some stuff. And it's not a question of, do I know everything? No, that's not the question. The question is, can I be helpful with what I know?
Yes.
And that was the question that it sounds like you asked and answered for yourself. And I think that's the question. A lot of
Well,
times we make knowing everything the barrier to entry,
mm-hmm.
but it's flip-flopped. It's, can I be helpful with what I know so far? I'd like to take a brief moment and thank another one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our one-on-one coaching program. Whether you're in the startup process or you've already opened up your cafe and roastery, our one-on-one coaching program is for people who are ready for a personalized touch and a proven process to follow. This 12-month program takes you through 3 major phases where we make sure you as the owner are flourishing, we make sure the business is flourishing, and finally we make sure the staff is flourishing. Not because staff is least important, but because this is the only process that actually works. When you join one-on-one coaching, you get access to all of our group coaching materials, including recordings and the private Slack community. In addition to that, you get a standing one-on-one meeting with us, where we walk you through how to ensure that you are flourishing as the owner, how to ensure your business is flourishing, and of course, how to ensure your staff is flourishing. For one-on-one coaching, we prioritize people who have taken our courses and or joined our group coaching, but you can always reach out to us and schedule a strategy call so that we can be helpful and see if one-on-one coaching is a good fit for you. Just go to our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com, and click the link to book a strategy call.
Do I know enough right now to know more later? You can use
Oh,
what you know and learn better
yeah.
because of that recognition. But if you
Yeah.
just constantly dog yourself, like this happens with
Yeah.
clients a lot, where
Yeah.
if you find yourself under a weight
Mm-hmm.
of um, details and fires that you have to put out and everything else,
Mm-hmm.
you end up really getting down on yourself.
Yeah.
And that arc of going through what you
Mm-hmm.
actually do know and what you have the power to discover as a result
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
is again one of those permission things, but it's also a
Mm-hmm.
point, pointing it out and saying, you're, yeah, there's some things that you need to fix, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but you're very good at these things, which
Mm-hmm.
allow you to do that work continually
Mm-hmm.
and sustainably.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people will say that, I've always thought that we need to X. And it's almost like, yeah, you're right. You are correct. That is not to be overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you pinpointed that is itself a consultative skill,
Yeah.
right? So
That's good.
it's empowering people to recognize that they have the power to recognize
Yeah.
and to take action on what they recognize.
Yeah.
It's just assisting people in the process of
Yeah.
self-discovery and
Mm-hmm.
evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's pretty much the whole point.
Yeah.
Not to say you need the keys to the shop way to success, you know.
Right.
um,
Trademark
that's
reserve.
exactly, yeah. It is trademarked.
I know. I know.
But yeah, thank you. But the point is that what good would that do you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
So
You mentioned on my takeaway notes, takeaway number 5 is lifestyle of learning, and I think that posture fuels and enables and empowers everything that you're talking about. There's also a dimension, and I'm I see this in you, and so I'm confident you embody this for your clients. But a recognition that it takes a tremendous amount of courage to step into what you know, and so to be somebody who knows some things
mm-hmm.
and knows that they know some things,
Mm-hmm.
it still takes courage to take action with those things. And I see a lot of folks, they'll self-inhibit with any number of thought processes. Imposter syndrome is probably the most like widely known because there's a phrase for it now. We've coined a term
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
anybody who's afraid to do something. It's now imposter syndrome. I appreciate the people who are fond of pointing out that humans have always been afraid to do new things. We don't need a name for it. That's not necessarily super helpful, but either way, what I'm poking at, what I'm pointing to, is the courage necessary. You can know something. You can know that you know something. It still takes courage to wade into those waters, to do the thing. And one of the things I appreciate about you is you took that step. You entered into not just the podcast, but then consulting, and then eventually consulting full time. That takes a tremendous amount of courage. And I don't think people always think of it that way. To
Mm.
implement the things that you know, to fully step into them, takes a tremendous amount of courage and enough self-trust to be willing to step out onto something, a bridge you built, so to speak. You have to trust your abilities a little bit to have the courage to do that. And I think it's cool that you've done that, and you also guide people in doing that.
Yeah.
And being willing to take action. What made you decide to go full time? This is kind of the last part.
Oh yeah.
Because it was, you were in between, and I remember getting, I think it was an email or something, because of the Coffee Fest connections. I think I got an email. It was like, somebody announced like on your behalf. I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I'm not
It
sure
was
how it happened.
Erica. But it was like Chris is going full time, and we were all like, yeah.
I miss those days. Yeah. So no, that was an interesting time. I will, and just really quick, and I'm gonna answer that directly. But I think it's hard what you just mentioned about entering in and the courage. Courage is because you're actually killing a part of yourself that you really are used to. And even if that thing is hurting you, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't.
Sure.
I'm familiar with my struggle, and gosh, man, there's some depth, there's some deep stuff there. We don't, it's not, I don't run a counseling, company, but there is some, personal reckoning that has to happen in the midst of these decisions that is courageous, because you're parting ways with something that's familiar.
Absolutely.
And so that doing, saying full time, I have been behind the bar. I am good at it. I make cappuccinos, with latte art on them, and I mop things, and I cash out drawers, and I laugh at people's stupid, jokes.
Get excited when they say they know the owners.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole shebang. Been there, done that. Have the scars and burn marks to prove it.
Yeah.
Both psychologically and physically. But
Hmm.
I was working part-time as a barista here locally as I was building Keys to the Shop. I was immersing myself in this world of, I didn't think podcasting, I thought, I know it can work. People are doing it. I'm a person. It can work.
Pause for a second. That line of reasoning is my favorite. People are doing it. I'm a person, so I can do it.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry. That like right there is, if we could, speaking of like waving a magic steam wand and instilling something in everybody in the coffee industry, man, what a powerful, very true and very useful way of thinking. People are doing
microfoam.
I'm a person.
You can do it, and people, because and that's what history is for. That's what observation is for. So we worry about making the right decision, and that's, there's almost no such thing as the right decision or the perfect decision. There's more there, but the point is that making this decision to go full time was a bit of that. I was down to like eventually one shift a week. As getting older, it didn't feel as great to work the bar. It's hard, it is hard. Even at the time today, when it's easiest as it's ever been to work the bar because of automation and people caring about ergonomics and stuff like that. It was still hard. So I said, I think we're just going to, what am I doing? Why am I working one shift a week? I have to cut this off and it felt way bigger because one shift a week's not much, but I had a toe dipped into the thing that I was familiar with. But I said,
Mm.
look, I've got to devote 100% of my time to this because it's
Mm.
showing me something
Mm.
that I think I am supposed to do and
Mm.
steward and be faithful to. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I feel like in hindsight, it was the best decision
Mm.
to make
Yeah.
in that moment. And so
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that. It took a lot of thought, took a lot of prayer, and finally, there it is. And
Mm.
my wrist has never felt better.
I had a thought for the first time the other day, because my quads were aching, and I was like, I wonder if this is from standing behind bar and standing at a roaster just for too many hours.
Mm,
I'm not saying this. Don't anybody come after me with a workman's comp claim. That's not what I mean. The thought crossed my mind. Like, how many thousands of hours have you and I stood either behind bar or at the console of a roaster? And I wonder if that has had like permanent negative physical consequences. I'm not
yeah.
sure, but I do appreciate, the strides that are being made to make things more ergonomic, and especially because that almost always correlates with just greater efficiency of movement behind the bar, especially. Roastery's not as big of a problem, although that's more
We're
like
working on it.
lifting heavy things on a repeated, like 50 pounds and above. Um, so there was something you said to me, and I think in my memory you said it twice. Once before I went full time, and once after I went full time. You said it again. Um, Either that, or I'm just doubling the amount of credit I'm giving you in my brain. So, but you said there's going to be an unleashing of creative energy when you go full time, when you make it your full time thing, and you went from even just one shift a week to full time.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you experienced that, and I experienced it as well. I was watching for it. I remember, because I think you had said it to me before I went full time. But that unleashing is really powerful. And so for somebody who has done something as a side hustle, we're both. I don't know if you call it that. I think of my initial early days when I was still working a full time job. I would call it a side hustle in my mind.
Sure. Yeah.
But somebody who they're doing the thing, and they also have a full time job. I know a lot of people who are trying to build a roasting business. They're roasting, but they still have
Yeah.
their full time job. I think one of the most powerful things, and I'm not saying just jump in, go all in, haphazardly. Think about it, pray about it, like you said, whatever. But also kind of factor that unleashing of energy into your calculus a little bit, because once you go full
Yeah.
time, there's it now it's not anymore that it would be nice if this thing worked. This thing has to work, and
Yeah.
that's completely different. I think
Yeah.
has that been your experience as well?
Sure. So the harnessing of desperation, I suppose. But the uh, if you think about pruning a plant and redirecting the
Mm,
energy, you're not pruning the roots. You're pruning where the energy
yeah,
from the same root system can go.
can go.
That's
Yep,
going to lead to better fruit. That's why we prune,
I like it.
right?
Yeah.
So it is with you. And if you are constantly just trying to do more and more and more, the fruit's going to
Mm,
taste worse and worse.
yes.
And so we're trying to actually, Greg McEwen, who wrote the book
I was just
uh,
gonna say that essentialism.
Essentialism,
Yeah.
is back on the show in the next week for his new book, Effortless. And Effortless
Are you?
focuses in on what's that?
He's gonna be on your show.
Yeah, yeah. He's been on the show once for yeah. You missed
I
that.
missed that episode. So Maxwell was giving me crap about this. We have what I would call a canon, the Threadbare Coffee Consulting canon and Essentialism and Effortless are like the first two books in that canon.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, after we hop off, I'm gonna go find that episode and listen to it. I somehow missed that, and I can't tell you how excited I am for his Effortless
Yeah,
book.
you should reach out. I'd love to see him on your show too.
Oh my gosh.
He's a very energetic guy.
Oh my gosh.
And The effortless idea, though, is based on the idea that there are ways of doing things that
Oh my
are not
gosh.
going to strip you bare of all of your resources, yet can still be
Yes.
productive.
Yes.
Um, Essentialism is basically, it's not the same thing, but it is a active prioritization of where your efforts is
Yeah.
going to go.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I did experience that. I did need to make it work, but honestly, I felt more anxiety in the first year or 2 years.
Hmm.
I would be like, what am I even going to talk about? I would go on hour-long drives
Yeah.
and try to figure it out. And now it flows pretty well, and it's still work to do.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, but the creative energy is way more
Hmm.
available because
Hmm.
this is what I do. And I feel a sense of responsibility. So
Yeah.
if I think about the same way as, what do my customers want?
Hmm.
What do my listeners need?
Mm.
Um, I went full time, especially because after COVID, I went full time 2020 in
Hmm.
November 2020,
Hmm.
and I saw how much the podcast was helping contribute to some people's processing of what was happening in the retail space,
Yeah.
just as a channel of help.
Hmm.
And as a podcast, it didn't hurt the podcast, the pandemic,
Yeah.
but the
Sure.
motivation was, I need to do more of this.
Yeah.
And it's irresponsible,
Hmm.
actually,
Yeah.
to continue to work behind the bar and rob this from what
Yeah.
it needs from me.
Yeah. That that mindset is was the other thing I was going to say about the courage that it takes to take what you know, and actually live it out or put it out there. Um, because the alternative is you keep it to yourself for whatever reason, and you
Mm-hmm.
help nobody. You heal nothing. You don't make anything better. If you know something and you know that you know it, but you hold it back, whatever positive impact that information, that experience, that knowledge would have had is also thwarted in that process. And that's the thing
Yeah.
that tipped the scales for me, was that realization of, if I hold this back, I'm helping no one. And if I put it out there, I'm maybe, hopefully, helping somebody, even if it's only one person. That's one more person than if I just hold it back because of
Yeah.
fear or insecurity, or um, not being. One of the things I love about essentialism is the recognition of the trade off. The
Mm-hmm.
non-essentialist believes they can have it all, and the essentialist simply understands, no, you cannot. There is,
Yeah.
pruning is necessary, otherwise the fruit tastes worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. It,
And
it,
yeah.
it is very much, when you think about your role at Threadbare and what you do in
Mm-hmm.
similar ways of responsibility and saying the best use of my time in service to others.
Mm-hmm.
It's also something that was brought up by Will Guidara on the show recently, of
Mm-hmm.
formerly of 11 Madison Park, and wrote the book Unreasonable Hospitality.
Yeah.
He said, hospitality and serving others feels great. And so there is a reward in that. If you build a coffee shop
Mm-hmm.
and a roastery in a business where people's families are fed, and the community is just like, I wrote a book in your shop. My kid,
Yeah.
she grew up in your shop, and she had the proposal in the shop and
Yeah.
wedding photos. I mean, there's all sorts of stories like that.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
That's the return on the investment. One of the best things I ever heard about Keys to the Shop was, somebody had emailed me, and I always love hearing these things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you got a story and you're holding on to it, but he said that he opened his coffee shop with keys to the shop, like right there,
Yeah.
and has run it with it ever since.
Nice.
And I thought, that is freaking scary and an honor. And it's like,
Yeah.
what? Wow. First of all, I've been doing it that long. Second of all,
Yeah.
what a cool thing to channel that information with
Yeah.
guests and deep dives and topics.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get that right away. You
Yeah.
just have to trust that
Yeah.
it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. That's so cool, man. That's really powerful. When the last kind of question I was curious to ask you is when you do work with folks, because I from the outside looking in, I can see how the podcast functions, and I can attend your talks at Coffee Fest, but um, the work of coaching and consulting and the way that you approach it is going to be unique. And I've always been curious, actually, just personally, to ask you, like, what's the basic structure of how you work with people,
Mm-hmm.
like structurally, what do you offer? If folks are interested in connecting with you to learn more, how could they reach out? What's the best first or next step? That kind of information I find is really helpful for people, because it removes any sort of shroud of mystery. Like, I don't know, this Chris guy. He's got a good podcast, but I have no idea what it would look like to work with him.
Mm-hmm.
What are the main ways you work with people, and what's like the next right step for seeing if it's a good fit for somebody?
There's tiers of this.
Of course,
And
yeah.
over time, I have figured out what works best, I think.
Mm.
The first would just be to reach out and, people set up a discovery call. It's like 30 minutes
Oh,
or so. So
yeah.
I had one this morning that was, about 50 minutes because we got carried away. We're just like asking
Yep, it
questions.
happens.
And it
Yeah.
happens. Yeah. And like, it's exciting. But the point is that you start with that, but the ground level is, for me, if we're going to do one-on-one coaching, which
Mm-hmm.
is my main thing, um,
Mm-hmm.
is 6 calls as a
Mm-hmm.
just standard.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've gone lower than that, but
Yeah.
when we're talking about especially a place that is open already,
Yeah.
we need to have time to develop the things that we create together or we
Mm-hmm.
collaborate on.
Mm-hmm.
What it usually looks like is once every 2 weeks for about an hour, we're going to meet and we're going to get in depth with what I've already set up with you as our agenda for
Mm-hmm.
your business. But
Mm-hmm.
also, of course, you're going to have questions, and
Yeah.
we're flexible like that. There's access between calls,
Mm-hmm.
sending feedback on things if we're working through value statements or checklists
Yeah.
or job descriptions, and
Yeah.
you need some input on this hiring process or whatever, that's also there.
Yeah.
But these official calls are coaching. They are where I get to be honest with you about what I see. I'm going to give you some pushback
Mm-hmm.
probably on
Yeah.
some assumptions.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be doing my job if I didn't have radical candor with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we have next steps
Mm-hmm.
where we are incrementally going through layer upon layer. 6 calls is a minimum. I have some clients where
Yeah.
we add services to this. And one of my favorites, which we've done a few of this year, is where we do the same coaching calls,
Mm-hmm.
but I will have already visited your shop for about 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
I open with the openers, I close with the closers. I don't
Ah,
actually do the cash drawer or anything. I'm
totally.
there. I'm there to interview
Very hands-on approach.
your people, your managers. I'm going to
Yeah,
have
totally.
meetings with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to create a report, and that's going to generate an even more specific kind of coaching
Mm-hmm.
afterwards because we
That's
now
awesome.
know what's going on as
Mm.
much as we possibly can.
Yeah,
So that's the heart of it.
that's awesome.
I've had people sign up for one call where it's just like an intense 1 hour session. We have some prep notes ahead of time and we're
Mm-hmm.
just go for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Uh, and I will also do follow up cafe assessments. So we
Cool.
can add layers on that
That's
training and
awesome.
whatever your business really needs,
Yeah.
um, and where it fits within your budget to
Yeah.
do so. And not everybody can afford to do consulting in the moment.
Yeah. Totally.
But it is something that typically costs way less than an espresso machine,
Yeah.
as I like to say.
Yeah.
But it will pay you more than an espresso machine ever could
Yeah.
hope to.
Yeah.
It's not a liability type of thing. It doesn't
Yeah.
break down, and you don't need to backflush it. So, uh, one thing that also is
Love
uh,
it.
something I just launched, which is the key holder coaching groups.
I
I've
saw
been kind
that.
of marinating on this idea of doing a coaching group
Mm-hmm.
for a while. And I just said, I need to start this year
That's awesome.
finally. And we launched our first group just last week. We've got 6 people as the first cohort of, coffee shop owners.
Yeah.
And I'm the host of that facilitator. I'll give
Yeah.
some input, but
Hmm.
mostly our arrangement there is that the people are selected specifically because I know they're going to work well together,
Hmm.
and they are going to help
Cool.
each other. And we're going
Yeah.
to guide this conversation. It's going to be camaraderie over
Hmm.
the course of, um, in this case, it's 6 months and 12 calls,
Yep.
at about
Yeah.
2 hours per call.
Okay.
So those are the
Cool.
main things that I've
Yeah.
got going on.
I love it. That's awesome, man. I love what you said about this kind of thing is way less expensive than the average espresso machine, but it's really I almost encourage people to not use the word expensive for this kind of thing because it's an investment. It would be like going to your financial advisor and saying, like, I want to buy 100 of a really great stock, and they're going to give you a dollar amount. But to say like, well, that's expensive,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of misses the point. It's an investment. The question is not so much how many dollars, but what's the return on that investment
Well
going to be?
said.
And
Yeah.
and I know for sure working with you is a really great investment if people partner with you in whatever capacity, if it's the key holder group or one-on-one coaching, with a site visit in there. But I would encourage and almost even challenge people to, in their coffee business in general, get out of a spending mindset and move towards an investing mindset, getting comfortable with the idea that most of the dollars that go out should be to things that bring dollars back in. That's an investment.
Yeah.
And something like coaching and consulting, especially with somebody like yourself, is absolutely in that category of a very wise investment.
Thank you for bringing
Uh,
that up. If I could, for a second, I think
yeah, yeah.
just further that with,
Mm,
when you think about back to the beginning of our conversation, we
mm-hmm,
talked about how people in forums will talk about the number one thing is hard to deal with people.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Chris Baca said this on the show. He doesn't like the word deal with people, deal with them. Right. And I've
Yeah,
heard this said elsewhere that
yeah.
I never, employees are not expenses. They're not expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
They're investments. I'm investing
Yes. Yep.
into the business. And even if you feel like, of course, money is leaving, but if you take a harder look at this,
Mm-hmm,
there's an exponential return,
mm-hmm.
and it takes courage to invest
Yes.
into people.
Yeah.
Just like we were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
as you grow, as you step into your strength to really serve well, to lead well,
Mm-hmm.
and invest well,
Mm-hmm.
that return is more likely. But if you're
Yeah.
always worried about the expense, as you're
Yeah.
mentioning,
Yeah.
then that kind of it's basically a poverty mentality that you're trying
Yeah.
to run your business with.
Yeah.
Um, it will get you what you're focusing on,
Yeah.
both in spirit and in reality.
Yeah. That's such a good word. Yeah. Well, man, I super appreciate your time. I've loved having you here. I've loved having an excuse to ask you a bunch of questions. You would have think I might have asked you these when we were roommates at Coffee Fest, but uh, the a couple of the things that stand out to me are, I love that you kind of referred to the best practices for running a coffee business as akin to brewing parameters. Like there's brewing parameters for a reason, because this is
Mm,
what yields a cup of coffee that's delicious. And it's the same thing with running a cafe or building a healthy coffee business, especially if you show up consistently and adopt that lifestyle of learning, which to me those are like intertwined. Showing up consistently, but showing up consistently to learn continuously, and not being afraid to reach out to somebody like Chris to help you see where you might be tripping over dollars to pick up pennies. I think, speaking of why this is an investment, why working with somebody like you is an investment, because you're going to be able to see where they're tripping over dollars to pick up pennies. And that's one of the most concrete ways. There's many, many ways that it's a literal investment financially to hire somebody like yourself, because you can come in and say like, oh, you're missing like these three key things. And if you tally up the number of dollars that those will bring into the business, you can pretty quickly see why it's
yeah, pretty easy.
a concrete
Yeah.
investment. And then the more abstract, more like harder to quantify aspects of why it's an investment they're also there. But it's nice. You can have both the quantity and the quality of
Peace
the
of
return on
mind.
investment. Yeah, the peace of mind. Yeah.
Freedom, the joy, why did you even do this? Why did you even open a coffee shop?
Why? Yeah. Yeah. What is it worth to you to fall back in love with why you started this thing in the first place?
That's right.
And a lot of times that's kind of the culmination of the work. So I would encourage people, no matter what, I would encourage people to adopt that investment mindset. Go from spending to investing. Stop seeing things as expenses and start looking for the things that are investments. And people in general are one of the biggest ones. It does bother me that generally accepted accounting practices put labor in the expense category. And I think it fosters that poverty mentality or that scarcity mindset that you're talking about. But an investment mindset is quickly going to take you down a path to investing in somebody like Chris, because it's a clear investment. It's not just an expense. And that's one of the things I encourage everybody that I hop on a free strategy call with. I encourage them to look for that. Think of investments, not spending. Move from a spending mentality to investment mentality. And no greater investment can be made in people in general. And like you said, you're a person too. An investment in somebody like you working with a company via a free discovery call is a fantastic next step. I think anybody and everybody can and should take with their coffee business. So thanks for being here, man. I super appreciate the work that you do, the podcast, the consulting and coaching, the example you set to me and to others, and for your time here today. I appreciate you.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. This was a great conversation. And if people wanted to reach out, they could just go to Chris at keystotheshop.com as an email, or keystotheshop.com. There's a little consulting page there. And you could reach out on Instagram is at keys to the shop. So,
love it.
And listen to the show, see what really is resonating with you. And that'd be great.
Yeah. So listen to the show, subscribe to Keys to the Shop, and share it with people. If ever you find something helpful on a show like Keys to the Shop, sharing it and subscribing, man.
Yeah. Everyone doesn't say it just for fun. It actually helps.
I love it. Well, cool, man. Thanks again for being here, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers. Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Chris Deferio of Keys to the Shop Podcast and Consulting. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube. That's a great zero-cost way to support this podcast. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please check out our online courses, our group coaching, and our one-on-one coaching. That's the absolute best way to support this podcast. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or guests you'd like us to invite, please leave those in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already following us on social media, we are at Threadbare Coffee Consulting on Instagram, and that's really the only platform we're active on. That's where I regularly post bite-sized thoughts on what it will take you, the owner, to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you. The content we post on Instagram overlaps with the podcast, but it's generally distinct from anything we cover on this podcast. If you haven't already visited our website, we have a myriad of free tools and trainings for coffee shop and coffee roastery owners. Everything from calculating your cost of goods sold for both a cafe and a roastery, which is completely different, pricing, which again for a cafe and roastery is completely different, managing labor percentage in a way that takes great care of people, etc., etc. All of those tools and trainings are available at our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And last but not least, thank you for your interest in building a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you.